Good afternoon, good morning, good evening, everyone. Welcome to this webinar on delivering CCUS infrastructure for the net zero transition. My name's Steve Schofield. I'm going to chair today's session. I'm head of climate policy and advocacy for Shell, but more importantly, I'm a new member of the board of the Carbon Capture and Storage Association. Really delighted to see a high level of interest in this webinar. From all around the world, by the looks of the comments in the chat box already. This is one of the CCSA's webinar series, which is a monthly set of webinars that alternate between those for members and those for external stakeholders. Today's webinar is aimed at external stakeholders and takes place in partnership with the Green Infrastructure Week, which is currently ongoing. And it highlights British technologies that will be used to deliver the biggest gains in our global transition to net zero. So please do check out the Green Infrastructure Week website if you haven't already. Includes some other scheduled events. Just before we get going, some housekeeping. First,
mit der Audioausgabe des Computers verbunden.
Sorry. A timely reminder, if I could ask all attendees to remain muted with their camera off during the presentations. There will be time at the end to ask questions, and then I'll definitely welcome you to come off mute and put your videos on. The webinar is being recorded, and the slides and the recording will be circulated to all the participants afterwards, as well as being available on the CCSA website. As I mentioned, all the questions will be taken in the last 15 minutes of the hour, and we're open to both oral and written questions. So if you want to put a written question in the chat box in the Q&A, then please do so. If it's an oral question you'd like to ask, then please write oral question, please, followed by your question, and I'll come to you, or hopefully have time to come to you towards the end of the webinar. So before I hand over to our first panelist, really delighted to be joined by some really excellent speakers today. The CEO of the CCSA, Ruth Herbert, David Holman from Storiga, Aniruddha Sharma from Carbon Clean, and Joanna Campbell from the National Infrastructure Commission, who will speak today on delivering CCUS infrastructure for net zero transition. Without further ado, let me briefly introduce the first presenter, Ruth Herbert. So Ruth joined the CCSA in October last year, following a successful public sector career that spanned almost 2 decades. In her previous role as Director of Strategy and Development of the Low Carbon Contracts Company, Ruth oversaw implementation of 2 key features of today's electricity market that we've come to know and love, the contracts for difference and the capacity market, and also the company's development into a trusted advisor to the UK government on decarbonisation. At the Department of Energy and Climate Change in the UK, Ruth headed the Electricity Market Reform Programme Office, overseeing delivery of the White Paper and Energy Act in 2013. And in 2008-09, following her negotiation of the EU directive on CO2 storage, Ruth led on international CCS policy and the London Ministerial Carbon Sequestration Leadership Forum. She was a financial services strategy advisor at Her Majesty's Treasury and an economic advisor for the City of London Corporation before that. Ruth, welcome, over to you. I think you've got about 10 minutes and you're going to talk about the CCSA's CCUS delivery plan. Thank you.
Thank you, Steve. My life flashed before my eyes then, so thank you for your comprehensive introduction. That was really, really thorough, and I won't need to say much more on that. So without further ado, I'll just share my slides and put those on full screen. To see if that's working. Okay. So I will say a little bit more about CCSA though, before I talk about the outcomes of our latest project on CCUS. We're a trade association promoting the commercial deployment of carbon capture, utilisation and storage. It's really important to flag that we're focused on this commercial large-scale deployment necessary to combat climate change. And we're quite unique in our representation of the entire chain the capture, the transport and the storage, and the many different applications of capture technologies, as well as different things you can do with the CO2, and we are very technology neutral. We are focused primarily on getting regulatory and incentive frameworks for the rollout of CCUS. To be clear, for those that may not be aware, when we talk about CCUS, we're talking about capture, which can be from any number of sources of CO2 that are currently being emitted, whether that's industrial, heavy industry, processes, steel and cement plant, or whether that's from, for example, a power station, maybe a gas-fired power station, for example, but also the use of capture from bioenergy, which can create carbon removal from the atmosphere, or negative emissions, as some people call it, and also direct air capture from the air, which can also obviously deal with historic CO2 or offset CO2 from harder to reach sectors. We also have hydrogen production with CCS, which is sometimes referred to as blue hydrogen. So all of these are potential sources of CO2 that we can apply capture to. We would then transport the CO2 via pipeline or ship, but also potentially rail and road. And in the UK, we're looking particularly at offshore storage and storing this in deep geological formations under the seabed, where it will stay for geological timescales, many hundreds of thousands of years, if not more. And there are some of our members looking at CO2 use in products, for example, CO2 heavy aggregates, which maybe use the CO2 in buildings, which can store the CO2, but potentially for sort of less timescales than the geological storage. If we look at our members, they are across the value chain for CCUS, as I said, and also all the supporting sectors that will need to build this industry. We've just done a project called the CCUS Delivery Plan 2035, and I just wanted to talk through that just for a couple of minutes and set the scene for the session. You'll probably all have heard of the net zero strategy, the UK government's strategy for reaching net zero by 2050, and as well as their interim target of 78% greenhouse gas reduction by 2035. This strategy includes a significant role for CCUS in decarbonising many sectors, as I've just discussed, and a pathway which is consistent with net zero by 2050 and other commitments of capturing 20 to 30 million tonnes a year by 2030 from a range of different applications. And that will rise to 50 million tonnes a year by 2035 in order to stay consistent with reaching net zero by 2050. And as part of that strategy, the government committed to having 4 CCUS clusters in the UK, with at least 2 operational by the mid-20s and a further 2 by 2030. And crucially, maintained funding for the infrastructure of £1 billion. These CCUS clusters in the UK are expected to be in the UK's industrial heartlands, and indeed many of the ones that have emerged over the last few years are exactly that. They're in industrial places close to the, many of them close to the shore, where they can access offshore storage sites, as I said before. But there are also further ones emerging all the time. So not all the names are on here, but there's a lot of circles, as you can see. And some of these are concentrations of heavy emitters, some of them more inland and not necessarily close to storage sites. The government's cluster sequencing programme has already selected HyNet in the northwest and the East Coast Cluster in the northeast as the first 2 clusters, part of Track 1, and that was announced in November last year. And Phase 2 competition is currently government's currently assessing the bids for those to see which capture projects will be connected to those clusters, to those transport and storage networks. Further phases of access to those networks is not yet, the process for that has not yet been defined. And 2 additional clusters to be operational by 2030, the Track 2 clusters, the selection process has not yet been defined. We're making good progress, however, with that first cluster process, and we're very keen that the government sticks to its timetable around that, and we're very keen to see the results of phase 2. But we know there's a lot more to do beyond that, and to reach the volume set out in the net zero strategy of storing 50 million tonnes, over 50 million tonnes by 2035. And as an industry, we got together to look at, okay, how do we respond to that? What would it take to be able to deliver that? Do we have enough of a pipeline of projects to deliver that scale of CCUS on that timescale? And what are the actions that are required to enable that? And as part of that, we came up with a framework for building a successful CCUS industry in the UK. And these are essentially the building blocks that we identified. The foundations really is an attractive investment framework, timely cost of delivery, so let's get the early stuff built and working, and a number of other important building blocks to make sure that the industry can actually grow and deliver the volumes required by the strategy. And this is all set out in our report, which you can find on our website under publications. We then looked at whether we had enough CCUS plans in the UK to meet that volume, and we found that we did. On this chart is the outcome of that analysis, and what you can see is that the current commitment of the government up to 2030 is the black line, the bottom line. And obviously, if that's all we did and we didn't plan to do anything else, then there'd be a lot of catching up potentially to do nearer to 2035. But actually, potentially, we would see industry close down and things happen, because if emissions are not taken away and there's no pathway to decarbonisation, then there's a bit of an existential question around the heavy industries in the UK. This blue line, which is something I'm really pleased about, is the pipeline of current projects in the UK, and it shows that we can actually take more CO2 out of the atmosphere earlier than the current 2030 commitment, and avoid the increasingly high cost of emissions when we get into the 2030s. The societal cost of emitting CO2 is something like £250 a tonne. It's really high. And that pipeline exists today, and these are projects which industry are investing in already in terms of their design, and in some cases their detailed engineering design has already begun. And we can see, and that's really supported by all the innovation funding that the government has put in, which is has really kick-started emitters looking at CCUS seriously. And then the pale green line is if we were to actually also take CO2 for other countries, how quickly could we do that, and what does that look like with the data we collected on storage sites and the demand that we can see coming from Europe. So you probably won't be surprised that there's a lot of data beneath that chart, and we don't have very much time, so I'm only going to go through this very quickly and you'll have to pay attention. However, we looked at capture ambition. Obviously, the 2035 50 million tonnes is what we really focused on, but obviously that would go out to a number of somewhere over 100 million tonnes by 2050, which is required by the Committee on Climate Change report. And what we can see is, as I said, sort of constrained deployment that is set out up to 2030 in the net zero strategy would take us to the target, the 20 to 30 million tonnes by 2030. But we have more projects in the pipeline, and those projects can deliver the 2035 target. But they can't proceed at the moment because, as I said, there's no clarity on those future capture rounds, where we hope that we will know what the next opportunity, the next phase of projects to join the networks will be. So at the moment, they cannot proceed to invest much further without that clarity, but they are there and they are currently being invested in by industry. And this assumes no attrition. So already this is looking quite tight for meeting the 2035 target, and it's really not that far away. We do have a number of projects which we've just put in a slightly different colour at this point in time, who are relying on shipping to take their CO2. And you can see that that's going to provide much needed resilience just to meet the UK's requirements under the net zero strategy. We will need shipping in good time. And if we look at storage, I've now introduced a dark shadow behind, and that is there are currently 4 licensed storage sites in the UK. They are progressing towards their full storage permit. And if we deploy at this rate and deploy everything on this chart in terms of capture, you can see that the storage will deplete over time. The good news is we've got loads more potential storage expansion sites in the UK, and we've captured data from as many of these as we could, and you can see the plans amount to a significantly greater amount of storage. Obviously, once that's appraised, it could be less, but there are also many more sites that we expect we haven't captured as part of this work. There's a 7 to 10-year lead-in time for these storage sites, and so we really want to see more licensing as soon as possible. So our conclusions really are we can do it, we can meet the target, but we want to see an accelerated capture and storage build-out rate, because we believe that reduces the total cost of climate change. It removes CO2 from the atmosphere earlier, and it also allows the industry to invest in the pipeline and in bringing the cost down of subsequent deployment. To enable this, we believe the government needs to implement a set of 10 urgent actions that we identified as part of this project. Many of them need to be delivered in the next 12 months to create the necessary environment for the industry to continue investing. This is a good thing for the UK because it will give certainty to our domestic supply chain to know what the pipeline of projects is and the true scale of the industry over the next 10 years. Also, it will reduce our reliance on imported commodities. We can have clean steel and cement made in the UK. And it will also enable the creation of a new export industry and attract inward investment to our industrial regions, because they will have a route to decarbonise the heavy industry. And this is about developing new skills as well and new green jobs, but it's also about safeguarding existing jobs, both in our manufacturing sector and in our offshore industries. So we have all the skills and capabilities, but we really need a clear deployment plan to be able to plan and build the capacity we need to deliver this. I really encourage you to read the report. There are 10 urgent actions that we've identified. As I say, I'm just going to put those up here. The most important one is that we have this clarity on subsequent phases and when this pipeline can connect to the network. And so the regular funded contract allocation rounds are really, really important, as well as finalising those contracts which enable the business models across the value chain to work. And as I said before, we really want to see the next cluster selection process for Track 2 launched as soon as possible this year, and a policy framework that enables these projects to develop at pace. All the rest of the actions, there are another 29 actions in the report, and they will have owners and timelines, and I encourage you to go and read those. Thank you very much.
Many thanks. Really sets out the picture at a national level, and also lots of reading for us to follow on doing. Let me pass over to David Holman now, who is the lead project developer for Storiga, who's going to talk about the Acorn project and the experience in Scotland and the Scottish cluster. Prior to joining Storiga, he was the lead for CCS and hydrogen at the Scottish Enterprise, and really delighted to have you here today, David. So over to you, please.
Thank you very much, Steve. Welcome, everybody. As Steve says, I am David Holman. I'm a Senior Commercial Advisor at Storiga. And today I'm going to give you a little bit of a sort of an overview of the Acorn project in Scotland and also the Scottish cluster itself. Just a little bit of background in terms of the participants within the Acorn project, particularly. So Storegga, as I've already said, we are a wholly owned, it's a subsidiary, and it's Pale Blue Dot. We're the lead project developer for Acorn, but we have a number of project partners alongside that. Shell, who are now the technical developer for a number of the actual delivery modules within the Acorn project. We also have Harbour Energy and North Sea Midstream Partners, NSMP, and they're all partners within the Acorn project set suite of projects. We've also received a significant amount of match funding to support the delivery of our Acorn project, and that money's come from both UK government, from the EU, and from the Scottish government. Our project, and the Acorn project to start with, before I get onto the Scottish cluster more widely, is largely kind of based around the northeast of Scotland, around the St Fergus and Peterhead areas of the northeast of Scotland. And there are a number of what we call modules that make up the Acorn projects, main one being the sort of Acorn transport and storage project, which is kind of like the linchpin of all of this, obviously. And this has always been centered and continues to be centered around the repurposing of infrastructure. So a number of the gas pipelines that lead from St Fergus out into the North Sea, which are no longer being operated, we're looking at repurposing for the transportation of CO2 out into storage locations. The key storage location for us, and the initial kind of storage location for us for our initial emissions, will go into what we're calling our Acorn store, which was within the Captain Sandstone aquifer, sort of GoldenEye sort of member there, as you can see, is just sort of L-shaped shape in the North Sea, and we're using the Atlantic pipeline and the GoldenEye pipeline rolling out of St Fergus, which connects directly into that store for initial CO2 volume storage. We're also now assessing future build out beyond Acorn storage for future sort of volumes of CO2 from the sort of 2030s onwards and beyond, and looking at a number of different locations, but one of those being the East May, a location further out into the North Sea, which has a huge capacity for storage, but actually it also has a pipeline access route through the Miller Gas offshore pipeline, which actually cuts through the East May location. So again, reusing infrastructure there. In terms of our other Acorn projects, we have Acorn Hydrogen, which will be located at St Fergus, and one of our sort of early initiation projects, which is the Acorn Capture project, which will be looking to capture CO2 from the actual processing of natural gas coming into St Fergus from the North Sea. One of us, just to kind of highlight some of the key kind of challenges that we see as we kind of build and progress our project, is that when we look at the sort of the way that the UK government and BEIS are progressing current sort of business models around reuse of infrastructure, or actually building out the track 1 clusters, most of the actual sort of the business model approach through the TRI model is focused on new assets and new pipeline assets. The reuse of existing pipelines is less considered as yet. It is obviously something that we're discussing and needs to be continued to look to discuss, but will require things like change of use relief for decommissioning to be put into legislation, as well as other challenges around the asset values and reuse of those assets. So these are things that we're looking at. We believe that Acorn is a catalyst for clean growth, and for the UK and potentially for Europe as well. In addition to sort of the projects we're talking about in the northeast of Scotland, we're looking to expand beyond that into much further afield through the economic opportunity of shipping, so the non-pipeline transportation using Peterhead Port, which is a deep water port in very close proximity to St Fergus, for the import of CO2, which we can then take to our stores, and also to connect to sort of where most of the emissions are in Scotland, which is in the central belt of Scotland, through the feeder network of pipelines that currently run from St Fergus down to the central belt of Scotland. Touched on the shipping facility, we believe that using the Peterhead facility, and we're doing a lot of work around that just now, is a real opportunity to move CO2 from other UK cluster locations, particularly the remote clusters, as well as international missions, whose geographic locations are some distance from identified stores. Obviously, to achieve this, there needs to be investment in new shipping and standardization of key infrastructure to allow movement of CO2 between locations, and ensuring that there is some sort of standardization and consistency to allow that sort of flexibility in movements and flows of CO2 between locations. From an international perspective, obviously there are a number of key challenges around movements of CO2 just now, around the London Protocol requirements, and also through the Brexit negotiations, where at the moment we understand that there is no ability to move CO2 outside of member states while these negotiations are ongoing. And also to understand how the waste liabilities from other countries are dealt with once they come to UK stores. We recognise that there's still a lot to be done around the MPT model. That's still quite a long way off, but we want to try and accelerate that. We believe that's something that should be looked at quite early and quite quickly to unlock the opportunity and to understand how the liabilities, cross-chain risks can be dealt with through emitter projects all the way through to the stores using shipping. Also need some clarity around the UK ETS scheme, around the fact that currently non-pipe CO2 does not receive the carbon credits, and obviously there's a consultation ongoing on that just now, which will hopefully close that loop. In terms of the pipeline and storage expansion, obviously we have already talked about East May as a storage location, expansion location, but the critical importance for us obviously is the expansion of the feeder pipeline down to the central belt of Scotland to complete the Scottish cluster. And it's currently part of National Grid Gas's transmission network. However, there is an opportunity to repurpose one of those pipelines for CO2 transportation north. We see this as a great opportunity, and we're working very closely with National Grid Gas and also with a number of projects in the central belt of Scotland to enable the movement of CO2 north. 90% of Scotland's large site emissions are within 50 kilometres of the feeder 10 pipeline in particular, albeit there's a number of feeder pipelines that run north to St Fergus from the central belt of Scotland. Again, there are a number of key challenges around that. There's the issue that although it's not fully defined, that those emitters in the central belt of Scotland are probably classed as dispersed users, given the geographical distances between them and the actual storage location. And also that we need to understand potential asset ownership issues around different assets. At the moment, the TRI model is very focused on a TNS code as a single entity. We believe there may be opportunities to look at multiple entities that own and run those assets between different locations. That needs to be considered as part of our Scottish cluster as well. This slide in particular will kind of expand beyond just the Acorn projects, obviously, and just shows the sort of scale and extent of our ambition. The boundaries are not constrained to the northeast. We're very much focused on the central belt, but also the shipping opportunities, which we think are very important to us, and tackling hard to abate sectors. Whilst we are not in track 1 per se, we are a track 1 reserve cluster, and we did participate in the phase 2 process, and a number of our emitter projects did participate, and that demonstrates some of the breadth and depth of some of the projects that are part of the Scottish cluster. We have within our suite of projects, possibly the first large-scale direct air capture project, Storega Direct DAC, which was looking at capturing one of the first sort of flows of CO2 out of the atmosphere into the Acorn store. We have 2 hydrogen production facilities, our Acorn Hydrogen, which we've already talked about, as well as the 5 Hydrogen Hub, a new power station at Peterhead, with the state-of-the-art carbon capture facilities, as well as an additional CO2 extraction project at Sage, and the INEOS project in Grangemouth as well. Our cluster projects are continuing to develop at pace to achieve first operation in the mid-2020s. We're still working on that basis and working closely with BASE to maximise the opportunity and scale. So in summary, with our experienced partners, existing infrastructure and well-understood geology, the Scottish cluster can deliver a reliable and value-for-money solution for carbon reduction. It doesn't come without challenges, as you know, and really for us, it's around the certainty in order to be able to take forward this project as quickly and efficiently as possible. We believe we can unlock support for a number of remote sites around the UK, as well as internationally, which will all benefit, we think make economic benefits to the UK, and in terms of accelerating the build out and scalability of CCUS. Thank you very much for listening.
David, many thanks for that overview of both the Acorn project and the wider Scottish cluster and the different elements of that. Let me move now to Aniruddha Sharma, who is Chair and CEO of Carbon Clean. He's an engineer by practice and has built up Carbon Clean into a global leader in cost-effective industrial carbon capture. Aniruddha, over to you. Talk about scalable carbon capture for dispersed industrial sites. Thank you.
Thank you, Steve. Also, thank you for all the audience for making time and being here. I also want to thank the Green Infrastructure Week, and I want to start by congratulating Ruth and the whole team at CCSA for actually taking the initiative and helping people try and understand what would it take to actually scale up carbon capture, utilization, and storage, which is one of the most important technologies out there for industrial decarbonization today, known very well today. What would it take to actually decarbonize it? Where do we actually need to focus on as we try and scale up CCUS? I am Aniruddha Sharma, co-founder and CEO, Chair Carbon Clean. We are a company that's focused on helping heavy industrial emitters decarbonize their existing operations from existing industrial sites. And I'll be talking today about how the dispersed sites can actually think about scaling up carbon capture. What are the factors they should be thinking about? What are the issues they should be thinking about? Where could they start influencing policy today so that they have something ready when they are ready to go at large scale? Just to tell you a bit about Carbon Clean, we are a company, like I mentioned, that's focused on revolutionizing industrial decarbonization. We started in 2009 and then moved to the UK, supported by the British government at that point of time. And since then, we've gone ahead and installed 45 operating sites where CO2 is captured from all sorts of facilities. For example, coal boilers, gas boilers, cement plants, steel plants, cogen units, incineration type units. So a lot of experience sitting out there helping heavy industry understand how CO2 capture could work for them and for their sites. To date, we have helped a couple of our companies and a couple of our clients help capture 1.5 million tons of CO2, and that is growing as we go forward. What we're really excited about is fully modularizing carbon capture, which is what we've been doing for some time now, and we are quite excited about that as we go forward. Simply because if you look at the global capacity to supply carbon capture equipment today, it's actually pretty limited. And where do you want to be in terms of decarbonization, in terms of 1.5 degrees Celsius or any kind of climate ambition? Net zero ambition, you would want to see that capacity to supply the carbon capture equipment scaled up 30 to 45 times between now and 2030. And we believe that's only possible if you start working on a fully scalable, modular and flexible carbon capture plant. So the technology that we are bringing out is compressing the size of the equipment by 10 times, compressing the footprint by 5 times, all in a boxed up solution that you could probably take to a factory and then mass produce it a bit like Tesla. I want to talk a bit about the dispersed sites because I think dispersed sites are those are most nervous about decarbonization. They don't exactly know how decarbonization could work for them. What should they be thinking? Additionally, there are many other strategies or opportunities out there. For decarbonization, you have hydrogen, you have renewable energy. So you have quite a lot going out there. And I think we've had some experience of working with some dispersed sites and some heavy industry. So I want to talk about 3 specific examples of how they are thinking about starting decarbonization and scaling it up over a period of time. The first one is a project in the US, in California, San Joaquin Valley, where Chevron operates a cogen unit and they're looking to decarbonize it. The objective is to start with one and then replicate this across the whole fleet. There are tons and tons of gas turbines, cogens operating all over the US, all over North America, in fact, all over the world. So really the idea here is what we call as a design once, replicate many times. So you would come up with one unit that's again fully modular, scalable. You start with one location and you start ramping it up quite significantly as you go to the other units for the expansion. The key thing here is the concentration of the CO2. So if you are someone operating cogen unit, I think I would pay special attention to the concentration of CO2. In case of cogen units, there is the CO2 concentration is as low as 3.5% CO2, but then you have other impurities, for example, oxygen, which is present in quite a high volume, 15–16%. So the carbon capture unit need to be designed in a certain specific fashion for your site. The second example I want to talk about is here in the UK. We've announced one project with Veolia. It's a waste incineration plant or energy from waste plant. Again, it's quite a common scene in for almost all the cities in Europe to have some kind of waste energy plant just outside the city, dealing with all the waste. So it's not something that you could just say, you could say, well, we'll shut this down, we'll replace it with something else in 5 years, 10 years time. It's a must-run unit. At this site specifically, the challenges are pretty common, and then they would necessarily deal with what we call as capturing CO2 from a flue gas contaminated site. And then there are cement plants where capturing CO2 becomes a little more difficult and challenging because of their space problems. I think in the UK, there is an opportunity to think, go into a little more detail and think a little more carefully about scaling up the implementation, especially for the dispersed sites. Because if you think about these sites, they are almost kind of standard units. You have cement and metal, you have refineries, chemicals together, you have waste incineration or waste energy outside large cities. And then you have other locations as well. But if you start growing some of the clusters, I mean, the government has announced 2 clusters, but as Ruth was mentioning, there has to be a process of getting to the second cluster. I think it's quite easy to start scaling up, start small and then start scaling up decarbonization, especially for dispersed sites. A great example is the tech that we are actually putting out there on the ground. So in the background, you see a standard carbon capture unit that's used for decarbonizing industrial sites. You can see it's quite big. It's a lot of space required, a lot of construction that needs to go on. And the front is the Cyclone CC technology that we are bringing out. All you need is 2 shipping containers, and then you're done. You have something that's going on for capturing carbon dioxide. So it's that simplicity, that scalability, and that modularity that I think will be required for helping the heavy industry decarbonize themselves as they go forward. In terms of the infrastructure that's required to help the dispersed site scale up, I think you need to think about a little more carefully. And you need to start dealing with the problem where the most of the money is. So if you think about a value chain for carbon capture and storage, a lot of the investment, especially for the dispersed site, would actually sit in the capture unit itself. So you need to start thinking about, from an industry point of view, there may be a view that as an industry, we may all want to take and say, okay, we're going to standardize the carbon capture equipment to 2 or 3 capacities, and that's going to help us scale up the dispersed site decarbonization quite quickly. I think it's quite important in investing in maturing the transport and storage network, especially the links from spokes to hubs. So the previous speaker talked about the Scottish cluster and Acorn project. It's quite important to think about how do you connect the dispersed site to the main storage facility. And last thing I would say, I mean, given the current scenario, it's quite important to start investing in local procurement and local supply chains if you want to decarbonize pretty quickly. With that, I bring the presentation to an end. Very happy to answer any questions, or if you want to send some questions, here are my contact details. Thank you, Steve.
Anuruddha, many thanks for that really interesting presentation. Let me turn to our last presenter. So Joanna Campbell from the National Infrastructure Commission. She's the Assistant Director there. And the National Infrastructure Commission is really about providing advice to the government on how to address long-term infrastructure challenges, including some that we've already heard spoken about. So Joanna, Joe, over to you, if I can, please.
Thank you, Steve. I'm going to break the mold slightly in this session by not having slides. So So thanks to the CCSA and organisers of Green Infrastructure Week for having me along to discuss the Commission's views on carbon capture and storage today. So as Steve already said, at the National Infrastructure Commission, we're tasked with providing impartial advice to the UK government on major long-term infrastructure challenges. So thinking about long-term challenges and the steps to address them runs through everything that the Commission does. So our goal remains to identify what decisions are needed now that will allow the country to meet its long-term infrastructure needs and deliver longer-term benefits. We have clear objectives, including to support climate resilience and in the transition to net zero emissions. We deliver against these objectives by recommending actions for the government to take, primarily through our once every 5-year national infrastructure assessment. So last autumn, we kicked off the process for the next assessment. This will be our second national assessment, and we're structuring our work around 3 themes: infrastructure's role in supporting the UK reach net zero emissions, ensuring infrastructure is resilient to changing climate and it has a positive impact on the environment, and infrastructure's contribution to levelling up, particularly focused on the role of transport. So across these themes are a set of 9 challenges that our analysis and engagement has highlighted are priorities for the success of long-term and efficient infrastructure delivery and operation in the UK. One of these said challenges is the need for new infrastructure to support delivery of net zero. That means carbon capture and storage and hydrogen systems. After previous changes in direction from the UK government, a decision has been made to support CCS in the UK. The cluster programme is well underway, as we've heard presenters, including Ruth, talk about today. There is, of course, a lot of work to be done, but the recent work by industry, coordinated by the CCSA to produce a delivery plan that clearly sets out the near-term actions needed, is a great step forward. At the Commission, we aim to look a bit further beyond the near-term action the government is taking and think about the medium to long-term outcomes and what further action will be needed to effectively facilitate these. This will require managing the uncertainty that exists, first in the volume of carbon transport and storage capacity that could be needed and by when, then the different methods of transportation that you might have, which has been touched upon by Anuruddha already, and also what position the UK may wish to take in a global market for carbon storage. As Ruth has indicated, we have a huge amount of potential in the UK to store carbon that goes beyond potentially the needs of the UK's economy itself. So first, I'll discuss volume uncertainty. So the Commission definitely sees CCS as playing a critical role in supporting the UK meet its legally binding emissions reduction commitments. In an economy that is seeking to reduce its impact on the environment, carbon needs to be viewed as a waste product. Just like wastewater and solid waste, we need the infrastructure in place to deal with it effectively and efficiently as possible. Of course, dealing with it will add cost, but it is essential if we're serious about tackling climate change. Costs can only be minimised by starting to deliver the technologies and infrastructure involved, and government's package of support is aimed at doing this. CCS will play an essential role in a net zero economy. In some sectors, its use case is clear-cut, and in others, there is a degree of uncertainty. There's a clear-cut case for use of carbon transport and storage infrastructure in delivering negative emissions, or, to give it its other name, engineered greenhouse gas removals. The Commission published a report on this last summer, and I'll come back to that in a little minute. CCS is also the only viable way of decarbonising energy from waste plants. These plants may play a relatively minor role in the energy system, but they are a critical part of dealing with our solid waste, a sector where overall emissions reductions have stalled. There are also industries where there are very limited or no alternatives to burning fossil fuels, which makes CCS an essential tool for decarbonisation in these sectors as well. In other parts of industry, the application of carbon capture as a decarbonisation solution will have to compete with other options. Hydrogen, or in some cases electrification, are viable options, with technologies advancing and increasing the range of viable alternatives. The role of carbon capture in electricity generation by combining it with gas-fired turbines is a little less certain. Increasing deployment of renewables, as we've seen in the UK over the last decade, will decrease reliance on natural gas for generating electricity in this country. And the current geopolitical environment has meant greater focus on the speed of the reduction and ultimately raised up the agenda the question of how you can meet electricity demand without any gas used in its generation. One alternative to natural gas turbines with CCS is in a decarbonised electricity system is to power turbines with low carbon hydrogen instead. The Commission's previous analysis demonstrated that deploying hydrogen turbines at scale as a complement to renewable technologies significantly reduces overall system costs. But that still obviously means gas on the system if CCS is used in the production of hydrogen. There are those that question whether hydrogen produced through reforming natural gas should be treated equally to hydrogen made from electrolysis. At this time, it would seem pragmatic to progress both. The cost trajectory of both is unclear and will only become clearer from developing these technologies, meaning CCS will be an essential part of the hydrogen production process. There is also added uncertainty in relation to the overall volume of hydrogen that will be needed in the UK and the role of imports. Its use in heating homes and businesses is the most material here, but hydrogen will also complement with gas combined with CCS and electricity in some industries. We're thinking about all these applications of CCS and the broader energy system and the uncertainty inherent in them when you think you're 30 years ahead as we do at the Commission. We have the opportunity here, perhaps more easily than within central government, to look holistically across CCS's different applications and join up the dots. So, of course, there is some uncertainty on the scale of CCS's role, but it will play a role, and the infrastructure needed to transport and store the carbon captured is, of course, essential. Which brings me nicely on to discuss transport. As a topic my fellow presenters today have spoken about already, I will endeavour not to repeat in any detail, and they've given you some really good examples of practical applications. The current cluster process, as has been described today, is up and running and looks set to deliver transport and storage infrastructure needed to demonstrate that CCS can operate effectively and deliver a route for decarbonisation for the sectors I've just discussed. The success of this process is reliant on having some anchor tenants. They're there to help prove the end-to-end system works. Government has a process in place for supporting these and funding set aside to do so. But there is currently a gap in policy to support what we see as a critical anchor tenant for CCS, engineered greenhouse gas removals, principally bioenergy with carbon capture and storage and direct air capture. Last summer, we published a report on this sector, setting out clear recommendations for government to act upon and to get it up and running. We're pleased to say they listened, and the net zero strategy, which Ruth introduced at the beginning of this session, published last October, committed to making progress this year on establishing this new sector and locking in the need for carbon capture and storage in the UK. It's a shame that the timetable for developing a support package for this sector is behind others, but we have high hopes the government will meet its committed timetable and move forward at pace with a consultation on business models due imminently. When we were producing our recommendations for that report, we looked at some of the trade-offs for where you might locate greenhouse gas removals. It's a relatively complicated picture, perhaps more so than we thought it would be when we started the work. What was, though, clear was that the most important consideration was access to a carbon transport pipeline, given the volume of carbon being produced. Existing industry, energy from waste plants and gas power plants do not have the luxury of choosing where to locate, and even in locating new sites, there will still be trade-offs that need to be considered. So we need to ensure that there's progress being made on what happens post-development of carbon transport pipelines in industrial clusters. For example, what options will there be for sites located away from industrial clusters? Is it economic to extend pipeline transport? Could pipelines no longer needed for gas transport be converted, as we've seen as the proposal at the Acorn site? How effective will road, rail and ship transport be? Or is onshore storage even an option? Bringing the storage to the capture plant rather than the other way around could be one option. There are still, of course, questions that we're thinking about as we look beyond the near-term actions being taken to develop clusters, recognising that the position reached on the above could have implications on the current development plans, and therefore waiting and seeing is not likely to be the most efficient solution, both in terms of the practical side of building the infrastructure, but also whether the right regulatory and governance model is in place to support the sector develop. Hopefully that's given you a bit of a flavour for the Commission's views on CCS and what we're working on. At the Commission, we recognise that we can't wait for perfect information and evidence, and there's some critical decisions that need to be made in the near term to support the UK meet its long-term goals. Our next National Infrastructure Assessment will be published in 2023, and our focus will be on setting out actions that support long-term development of the sector, recognising the uncertainty within it. Please do get in touch if you want to discuss further, and we're very much in listening mode at the moment and keen to hear from you. Thank you, and back to Steve.
So many thanks, and indeed we're looking forward to that publication next year. I'm sure it's a lot of work beforehand, so thank you for that. If I could ask all of our presenters to come back into the virtual room. You'll have seen from the chat we've had a pretty lively number of questions, which I will briefly try and sort of lump into a few categories and pose to you. Apologies if we don't get to all of the questions. Inevitably, there's lots more, but we will try and come back to you. Maybe I'll start with the storage questions, and maybe David, I could direct sort of three at you if possible, and ask for your brief response. So firstly, around storage, where do we anticipate locations outside of the UK for storage to be shipped to? And maybe linked to that, the question around, the current UK government storage by 2030 is effectively 100% of current global capacity. So is storage really going to be a big issue globally? And then the difficult question, which is probably around stewardship or insurance of those storage. I don't know if you could try and answer those, David, for me briefly.
I can have a go, Steve. Thank you very much. That's about hospital pass. In terms of the storage, I mean, obviously, from a UK perspective, it is the government's ambition to see significant CO2 storage. That is a driver for them, and that's why they've got a very ambitious target. The key for us is that we have a lot of very well understood geological storage around the North Sea, which has been built up for many years of oil and gas operations. So we're not starting from scratch here. We're working very closely with a number of very experienced and very knowledgeable subsea geologists to actually make sure that the stores that we are going to use are capable of accepting CO2. Already there are three stores under license, which we're looking to take through to permit across the UK, and that's only going to grow more quickly. As I said, the storage that we're looking at just on our own in the North Sea is around about 500 million tons of capacity on its own. That's just the start. So the storage capability is huge around the UK. In terms of a sort of an international perspective, we at Storega are actually working quite closely with a number of different locations across the globe. This is separate to Acorn, but as Storega as an organisation, we're looking at a number of opportunities. And to be honest, we're already seeing projects emerging across the sort of the North Sea itself. Norway with the Northern Lights, you've got Porthos in the Netherlands. So there are a number of opportunities growing. And they're now looking, and there's a number of opportunities coming out of the US and in Southeast Asia as well. So I can only see this going one way and growing pretty quickly once we get going. It's getting that model working that allows this market to unlock, and that comes down to the commercial models fundamentally. I don't know if there's something else you asked me there, Steve, I've forgotten. But
it was the liabilities for it, which I think is a challenge.
Yeah, an ongoing discussion.
Right, great. Thanks for that, David.
No problem.
Maybe I could just move to questions around government support, and we had a few of those, but Joe, maybe I could direct that to you first, and maybe Ruth, you want to come in. But there's a question around whether the rollout of CCS projects is really a carrot or a stick approach, or a mix of them, and also how viable the UK sort of CCS projects are without the sort of functioning business model, although we have heard there's a lot of elements in place. Given the short timescale to 2030, any sort of reflections on that you could make, Joe? That'd be great.
Yes, Steve, happy to give first reflections. I mean, I think it's probably a bit of both is the right answer. So we're talking here about a new sector, which, as I think Ruth made reference to, there's been a lot of R&D investment and a lot of investment through private industry as well to make these technologies viable, but they need that kind of certainty, which government can create through providing the support mechanisms that are in discussion now for many of the sectors. I said greenhouse gas removals is the one where we don't yet have a business model, but it is planned for. So I think government can support these new sectors really get going. And we saw the success of that, for example, in the UK offshore wind industry, that if you start providing the right support, the industry then moves forward and the costs fall. And, you know, there's reasons to be hopeful that those applications can apply here on CCS as well. But I think we do need to understand that, you know, I've talked about carbon as a waste product, and, you know, it should be that we should be at a position where ultimately the polluter should be paying for the infrastructure needed to address that waste product. So certainly at the Commission, we believe that there's more of a role for the UK emissions trading scheme to be used to encourage the lowest carbon options, of which CCS is one, hydrogen is another, electrification is another, but that, you know, that we can't automatically just switch to a polluter pays. We need to have the support mechanisms in there, and we need to transition to that model. Ruth, would you like to add anything to that?
Yeah, I think you described it well. I think whilst our current economic system does not recognise the true cost of emitting this CO2, we need to have measures that ensure that we can deploy this technology successfully. And I think, you know, a lot of what we'll be deploying CCS on is heavy industrial plant, things that are exposed to international competition. So until such a time as we have sort of global carbon markets, or we have some way of ensuring that you know, we can deploy the technology without, I guess, damaging those industries, and meaning that they can no longer compete in a global market, then we have to have some kind of scheme that effectively creates that framework through intervention by the government. And this is exactly the area where only the government can really intervene, because at the moment there just isn't the economic drivers to deploy this technology. I think by creating and building the cluster infrastructure first, then that will allow, and we hope that will enable, the lowest cost types of carbon capture, which, as the emissions trading scheme price rises, the sectors that applies to actually look more and more attractive, and potentially to be able to be deployed commercially. But of course, if you talk to investors, and what they always say to me is that, you know, there's always some concern that governments may undermine ETS prices if they get too high, and so how investable that future ETS price is something that is always debated. But I think at the moment the ETS doesn't cover the whole economy. We're not recognising the full cost of emitting carbon, and we don't have carbon border adjustment mechanisms or other things that protect our industries while they decarbonise in a global economic system. So we do need these interventions, but I think obviously as the cost of the technology come down, as we recognise the full cost of emitting carbon in our economic systems, then this technology obviously will be able to stand on its own 2 feet. And what the industry is trying to do is create a rollout programme that will enable supply chain to in the UK to develop and to bring the costs down, and to invest in the next generation of technologies, and make sure that we can do this as cheaply as possible going forward.
Thanks, Ruth. I realise we've got to the top of the hour, so I think we're going to have to close there. I apologise for not giving enough time, as ever on these webinars, for questions, but I'm sure all the speakers will be happy to respond to people coming to them directly with questions. Can I just thank all of our speakers for their excellent presentations and contributions today. I think it's a really great session, judging by the questions in the chat. I think there's been some really positive sort of questions and responses, and I hope everyone has found it to be a really inspiring discussion. I wish you all a very enjoyable end of the day, or rest of the day, and please keep an eye out on the CCS website for further events. So once again, thank you all for joining, and thanks again for the speakers. All the best.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Thanks.